So this hive is a really good example of what to expect your first year in beekeeping. So this was a brand new nook, only 3 or 4 weeks ago. So it's a new nook that was recently installed into a hive. And this is pretty normal as far as what it should look like. Now, a lot of people really want to make honey in their very first year. That's not very common. I'm going to show you how you can in just a second. But this hive had the top brood box added only recently, and they really haven't done much up here. We happen to have a box full of comb that we were able to give this hive, but they really haven't done much. They've got still some foundation, they've got empty frames up here. They're really not moving up into this top box, and all these frames are really dry. There's no honey at all stored up here. So let's look down below and see if we can get a feel for what's going on. Now the bottom box is pretty full of bees. When I look down between the frames, this bottom box is about 80 to 90% full of bees, which is exactly where we want it when we add a second box. Also, when I'm looking down here, I'm seeing lots of brood. So we've got beautiful frames of brood. So that's a frame of mostly capped brood. Some is hatched out in the middle. This is a frame of eggs and larvae. But one interesting thing that I'm not seeing is just a whole lot of extra honey. So we've got, this cleared out space. There's eggs and larvae all in here. We've got a little bit of honey up here in these corners, but it's really not much. We've got a little bit of nectar glistening up here, a little bit of capped honey down here, but this frame is basically weightless. It really has very little honey. We've got some capped brood here, uncapped brood here, a little bit of honey up here in these corners. And when I'm digging further into this hive, one telling thing is to look at the outside edge frame. So what do the frames bordering your brood nest look like? They've got a little bit of honey, but not much. You can see that those center frames, there's no brood, there's no honey. They've got a little bit of capped honey down below. They've got some capped honey here as well, or some uncapped and capped honey here, but not a lot. I mean, this frame probably weighs like half a pound. When I lift up on the box, this bottom box feels almost weightless. I mean, it might have 5-10 pounds of honey in it total. So really the reason this hive isn't jumping up into that next brood box and growing as fast as I want it to is because it's really short on food. I want to see maybe two frames on this side and 2 frames on this side, pretty much completely full of honey or syrup. And then I would expect to see them starting to move honey and syrup up into that top box. So if you've got a newly installed hive that's 3 or 4 weeks old, and you lift up on it and it feels just very lightweight, the frames all feel lightweight, you don't have frames full of honey, even though we're in the middle of a honey flow, I'm going to resume feeding on this hive because they really are not growing very quickly because they don't have enough honey. And they're conserving their energy. They're not raising as much brood because they don't have enough honey. So just because we're in the middle of a honey flow doesn't always mean, especially for new hives, that they have the resources they need to grow. My goal is to have the middle 4 to 5 frames in my brood box brood, and all the other frames, the other 4 or so frames, or 3, depending on how many frames you have, should be full of honey. And if I've got another box on, I want to see them drawing out comb, moving up honey into that second brood box. And that's a good indication that they have enough food. Now, you want to be careful that you don't give them too much food. If you've got, 3 or 4 or 5 frames of solid honey in the bottom box, and they're putting fresh nectar or syrup intermixed with all of your brood, if you've got a frame of brood and all in the middle where your brood is, they've also got nectar stored there too. That could mean your hive is becoming honey bound. They've got too much stores. What I would do in that case is I would add another box and back off a little bit on the feeding. But that's a bit unusual to see this time of year. Usually we see that earlier in the spring or in the summer especially. But this hive, there's nothing wrong with it. They've got 4 great frames of brood. Bee population looks good. They're moving up into their second box. They just need a couple gallons of syrup. So I would give this hive a gallon of syrup this week. I would give them a gallon of syrup next week, and then maybe that third week start cutting it off to maybe a half a gallon. And so 2.5 to 3 gallons of syrup should get this hive back up to where they need to be.